Prairie Podcast. I'm Ed Robertson. For many years now, listeners have been emailing me with lots of different versions of the same basic question. And that question is, how do I get a job in the conservation world? Some of these inquiries come from college students or young professionals, while others come from folks who are deep into a specific career path but want to make a change. I'm always happy to receive these messages, and I'm flattered that anyone would think I have valuable advice to offer. Unfortunately, I've never been able to provide what I believe to be a suitable answer, mainly because I could not do the question justice within the constraints of email or social media. And over the last few years, the volume of incoming messages has reached the point that I simply cannot keep up with it all. So if you've reached out and I've not responded, my sincere apologies. For at least the past 3 years, I've been considering answering this question in podcast form, thinking the episode could serve as a detailed resource for anyone who asked the question, and for those who will in the future. But I procrastinated or rationalized reasons not to, mainly because I felt extremely uncomfortable about sitting by myself, blabbing my thoughts and ideas into a microphone. I never want to come off as a know-it-all or some kind of wannabe internet guru. But the volume of the incoming messages keeps increasing, so I finally decided to put my ego and self-consciousness aside and just answer the question in podcast form. I wrote an 8-page outline that laid out everything I know about finding a job in the conservation world. Then I sat down in the shed and let her rip. The result is a ridiculously long soliloquy in which I put it all out there. I'm calling it a shed session. Please keep in mind that this episode is simply a recounting of my own personal and professional experiences. It's not some kind of one-size-fits-all hack that will lead you directly to your dream job. I've long said that I'm the last person anyone should be asking for career advice. And there are certainly tons of people who are much more experienced and accomplished in conservation than I am. But for those of you who did ask, this episode's for you. I lay it all out, including my specific career path, my specific job in the conservation field, skills that are needed in the conservation sector, why relationship building is the most important skill, how I built a deep and broad network in Colorado, despite only knowing one person when I moved here in 2010, why I think networks are the most valuable assets, what I look for when I was hiring for conservation roles, what you should look for and avoid in conservation organizations, pros and cons of working in nonprofit conservation, book recommendations, and much more. Links to everything are in the episode notes. And again, this is just my personal experience and my possibly weird ideas about doing purpose-driven work. For those of you who've reached out, I hope this adds some value. And for everyone else, we'll be back to the regularly scheduled interviews later this week. Thanks so much for listening. Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Ed here. For those of you watching this on Patreon, good to see you again. For those who are listening, thanks for listening to the podcast. This is a little bit of a different episode, different kind of episode. It's one I've been considering doing for many years now, but just keep putting it off for one reason or another. But I wanted to answer a very specific question that I've been getting for years and years and years, either through social media or through email or through the forum on my website. And I get this same question over and over and over. And I generally just can't respond to all the emails because at this point, if I was responding to emails all day or responding to all the emails I get, that's kind of all I would do. But also, even before the emails started kind of piling in at the rate they pile in now, I couldn't really do this question justice because I have a long answer to it. And so before I go any further, the general question that I get, and it's by far the question that I get the most, is, hey, I'm doing some kind of job now. I'm a teacher. I'm in banking. I'm an engineer, whatever. And I want to make a move into the conservation world. Do you have any advice for me? And so even if I could respond to all the emails, there's no way that I could write out all my thoughts in a coherent manner. I mean, it would probably be like 20,000 words or something, and it would take forever, and I don't even know who would actually read it. And so I've been rattling around with this idea in my head for quite a while of, all right, let me do a podcast and answer that. And so when I was kind of getting into the conservation world, people were nice enough to go out to lunch with me, and I would just ask them questions, and they would give me kind of their career path and how they ended up doing what they're doing. And a lot of the podcast is actually that same kind of conversation. And so, I get emails from people, hey, can I take you out to lunch? Can I take you out to coffee? And just given all the, different constraints around my time, I just can't make it happen, but I can do this podcast. And so I'm actually sitting out here in my shed, which is where I normally do not record in the shed. I record in my basement, but I think people think I record in the shed. But because it's kind of loud, it's right up against the alley, so like garbage trucks drive by and like kids are playing and dogs are barking. But I'm going to try this kind of new episode where I answer this question. I'm in the shed. I'm recording this for Patreon supporters on video, recording it obviously on podcast as well. And so I'm just going to try to answer this question. And so if you're interested in the answer, hope you get some value out of it. If you're not interested, I'd say turn it off now because it's just going to be me blabbing like a crazy person for probably like an hour, just going through kind of my career and how I ended up doing what I'm doing and the advice I give to people when they come to me and they say, hey, I want to get a job in conservation. How do you do it? And so I was thinking I would start out by reading just a few of I just grabbed 3 of the different questions that I've gotten. They're along the lines of, I want to get a job in conservation. I'm going to read them to you just so you have an idea of the types of questions I get, and then we'll get into it. So the first one is, hi, Ed. I've been a high school biology and environmental science teacher for nearly 20 years, and I'm looking to make a career change in the next few. I've been listening to the podcast for the last several years and have enjoyed every one. Thank you very much. As someone who shares my interest in education, conservation of natural resources, land management, travel, adventure, etc., and who's rubbed shoulders with other people in the same sort of fields, I'm looking for your advice towards what sorts of skills, certifications, etc., you see a demand for in these types of roles. E.g., some have told me that GIS skills are in high demand, while others have disagreed. I'm sure there are other examples too. Sounds like you get this question a lot, so consider this another reason to record your answer in podcast form sometime soon. That's what I'm doing. As someone of about the same age who also moved here from another part of the country and has begun to raise a family here, I appreciate your insight. So that's one of them. Another one is, I'm a 25-year-old technology salesman with a passion for the outdoors, conservation, and real estate. After listening to a couple of episodes and seeing your work history, I felt like I had to reach out and introduce myself. I know your time is valuable, and I would love the chance for us to have a conversation at some point and talk about real estate conservation and getting involved while I'm young, if you could spare the time. Look forward to hearing from you. And then the last one is, my name is blah, blah, blah. I'm just starting my conservation journey here in Utah. I wanted to reach out and say that this podcast is my number one motivator day to day. Again, thank you very much. I'm back in school studying environmental sciences and wanted to see if you had any personal tips and tricks into getting started down this road. Thank you so much for all you do in educating the world about how important conservation is. So, I mean, just those emails are so damn nice. Like, that is so nice that people write and that people think I have anything to offer. And, I get so many of those. And so apologies if you've sent me one and I haven't responded. If you listen to the podcast or subscribe on Patreon, you know how crazy email makes me. But the vast majority of emails I get are just so nice. And so thank you. And I'm going to do my best to answer these questions. And the other kind of motivator for this podcast episode is, I think people have heard me say that everything I do, the book recommendations, the podcast, all that kind of stuff, it is all I consider it like an instruction manual to my 23-year-old self. And for those who are not familiar, my 23-year-old self worked at Merrill Lynch in Greensboro, North Carolina, and then Wilmington, North Carolina. I was wearing a suit and I had some pretty sweet cufflinks. And I was trying to be a grown-up, and I was just kind of following the path that I thought I was supposed to follow. But I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. And I was sitting there in this office, and I can picture it now, just kind of like, damn, there's got to be cooler stuff than this. And I would look online, or that was in the early days of the internet, or read articles in Outside Magazine, see all these cool people doing cool stuff. And I was like, how do you do that? And so the podcast is really, I think about that 23-year-old guy sitting there, and I think if that guy could listen to these conversations with these cool people and or read all these books, it would help him speed up the process of going and finding something that he really liked to do. And so I'm kind of considering this soliloquy of me sitting in my shed like a crazy person talking to myself, aimed at that 23-year-old self too. So if I just wanted to add value. And so I've got a couple of disclaimers before I get started. And if you hear a bunch of paper rustling, it's because I've got 8 pages of notes here. So sorry, again, I'm blabbing. But the disclaimers are, number one, people keep asking me for all this career advice, but I would say I'm probably one of the last people that you really want to ask for career advice, because my career has been all over the place. I'm 45 years old now, and it is wound in every single direction that you can imagine. And I'll go through kind of the career just so you have an idea of how it all worked out for me. But I'm not claiming to be, some kind of expert or some kind of career counselor or somebody who has all the answers. I'll just tell you what worked for me. And if it works for you, that'd be awesome. Or if there's like one 5-minute piece of this thing that works for you and you can throw the rest away, that I would consider that a victory. And as y'all know, if you listen to podcasts, it kills me to talk about myself a lot. And, when I'm interviewing people on the podcast, I feel like I've got an internal alarm in my head that if I talk for more than like 45 seconds, it starts beeping like, shut up, shut up, shut up. You need to be quiet. This is not about you. And so the fact that I'm sitting here just blabbing is pretty unnatural. And so I hope it makes sense and adds value. Another thing about my path and any sort of career advice, in my experience, I've read a million books about it. I've talked to a million different people, both in person and on the podcast. And what I can tell you is there is absolutely no one size fits all for this kind of stuff. My path is unique to me, just like everybody I've had on the podcast path is unique to them. And I can promise you one thing, that if you tried to copy, like say you could somehow copy every single thing I do or did and make it exactly your path, it would not work for you. Like it would not lead you to the same place. So again, the whole idea of this thing is to give you a few nuggets, and then you can go listen to a podcast with other people that have done cool stuff, take nuggets from them, and then kind of make your own system. And so just keep that in mind. I'm not trying to be a guru or some kind of life hack career counselor. I'm just telling you how I did it. I also have a lot of resources in this episode, different books, podcasts, that kind of thing. And I want that you can check the episode notes for those. And I want this to be the kind of thing that can be a resource for people to go and learn more. You listen to this, you're like, good Lord, that guy talked for a long time. But there are all these awesome resources here. And I'm going to go and explore those. So that's one of my other goals. Another disclaimer, as you'll hear in my story, is when I established myself in the Colorado conservation community, I was living in Colorado. And so I don't know that the advice that I give, because a lot of it's about networking and about building a network of people and building relationships. I don't know how that would work. Like say if you're living in New Jersey and you want to move to Montana. As you'll hear, I was in Colorado trying to establish myself in Colorado. So just a heads up on that. I just said it. This is just me talking. Me and you shooting the shit. Pretend like you're sitting across from me at lunch. You're not going to get any Winston Churchill soliloquies here. I'm not going to be talking real sophisticated like Rich Roll does on his podcast. This is just me talking, telling you what I did. And so if you don't like or if you don't like stuttering, or if you're looking for some sort of really refined public speaking, again, I would recommend to turn this thing off right now. And last thing, audio quality. I am using my fancy recording stuff, but I'm in my shed, and so there very well can be a lot of noise, like trucks riding by or sirens or whatever. So excuse that if you don't mind. So, all right, that is kind of the beginning. So here's how the conversation is going to go. I'm going to set the stage. I'm going to tell you about my career and my trajectory, just so you understand kind of what I did very briefly. Then I'm going to tell you about how I moved to Colorado soon after business school. And I knew one person professionally in Colorado, and I turned that one person into a pretty big network that allowed me to eventually get a job in the conservation world. And then I'm going to tell you what skills I think are valuable when you're looking for a job in conservation. And then, spoiler alert, the most important skill in my mind is building relationships. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then I'm going to tell you about exactly what I was looking for when I was hiring somebody. When I was the conservation director at Palmer Land Conservancy, I had to hire somebody to open an office in Pueblo, and I'll tell you exactly what I was looking for in that person. And then I'm going to tell you what I think you should look for in an organization. If you say you got 3 or 4 different job opportunities, if I were you, this is what I would do when I'm thinking about which job to take. Then I'm going to give you a bunch of book recommendations, obviously, and then I'll talk about some of the pros and cons of working in conservation and working kind of in the nonprofit field in general. So again, this is just me telling you, and as y'all know, I get scolded all the time for being self-deprecating. So I gave you the disclaimers, and I'm going to try not to be self-deprecating the whole time and giving a bunch of contingencies like, well, I don't know what I'm talking about, but this might not work for you, but just know that I'm not trying to be some kind of guru here, and I'm not going to say it again after that. I'm just going to give you the advice. All right, here we go. Number one, setting the stage. This is my career. This is how it worked for me, just so you know. I mean, I think bits and pieces have come out on the podcast, but I grew up in Eastern North Carolina, went to Wake Forest University, studied economics after changing my major about 100 times. Eventually graduated with a bachelor's in economics. When I was in my senior year, my last year there, I started interning at the Merrill Lynch office there in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. It was funny because somebody told me I needed to go to the career services office and talk to them and follow that little path. And so I go in there and the guy was like, you should quit your internship and focus. You shouldn't get an internship. You should instead focus on your grades, because my grades weren't all that great because I wasn't very disciplined. And I did the exact opposite, and I focused on the internship. And then when I graduated, they gave me a job immediately. So that worked out very well. Went to work at Merrill Lynch in Greensboro, North Carolina, which is right down the road, and then eventually moved to Wilmington doing that. I was kind of working with Merrill and UBS because the team I was working with moved to UBS. Realized after a few years that I didn't particularly love it. And I got into the commercial real estate business in North Carolina and did that for a few years. And all the while I had this nagging feeling I wanted to move out west. I should have just, gone and skied for a year, whatever, tended bar, and I never did it. And so I started sending out my resume to a bunch of different ranch brokerages in the West, and eventually got hired by one. So I moved to Jackson Hole, Wyoming from 2005 to 2007. So during the real estate boom, and sold ranches there. And then left in 2007 to go to business school. Got a full scholarship to go back to Wake Forest to get my MBA. And the reason I say full scholarship is because that kind of plays into my path. It allowed me to pursue some things because I was debt-free. If I'd had, well over $100,000 in debt, my path would not have been what it has been. So got the full scholarship, went to business school. As some of y'all know, I had a pretty terrible health scare during business school, and then the economy crashed. Got married. My wife and I moved to Costa Rica for a year for her job, which I could tell you about later, and then moved to Colorado after that. So we were in Costa Rica for a year, moved to Colorado in 2010, and I started, I kind of rejoined the real estate business. So I started out on my own. I just got my real estate license in Colorado and was selling ranches with a focus on conservation, and did that for a few years, and then realized that I would be much better off by joining up with an established brand and established group in Colorado that did the same kind of thing. And I knew a guy named Ken Murr of Murr Ranch Group, who's very conservation minded. I've actually been on his podcast, and there's a link to that. I knew Ken from my days in Wyoming, and he is, at the time he was the president of the Colorado Coalition of Land Trust, just a very conservation-minded guy. And I asked him, hey, can I join up with your team? And he said, yeah. So I was with Murr Ranch Group for many years until I eventually joined the staff at Palmer Land Conservancy, where I was a conservation director. I was on the board at Palmer. I live in Colorado Springs. I was on the board. I saw all the innovative work they were doing, and it was really interesting and exciting. And all of a sudden I was living in Colorado Springs instead of Boulder, where it is affordable. In Boulder, it's like San Francisco, and you just got to have foot on the gas, make as much money as you possibly can. Very stressful. And all of a sudden in Colorado Springs, I'm like, well, the math works to do what I want to do, and be in the conservation world. And I can have a nonprofit salary and still, pay my mortgage with the help of my wife, who works full time. So that's kind of that was my path of how I ended up in the conservation world. And so at Palmer Land Conservancy, I was the conservation director, and I was there for 4 years. And so when I joined the team, the idea was that I would bring my real estate experience. And at that point, it was probably 15 years of real estate experience plus MBA stuff to Palmer to do conservation easements. And then as I joined the team, more of what I was working on was their water conservation work. There's a project that you probably heard me talk about in some of our past episodes, the Bessemer Farmland Conservation Project. And it's a really innovative water conservation project in Pueblo County. And so I ended up being in charge of that project. And so I was kind of overseeing that project. And then I was also raising a lot of money for that project. And surprisingly, I think a lot of my job really transformed into a lot of fundraising from foundations and from some individuals, and then from, different public sources of funding. And so it was great, and I absolutely loved it. And I did that for 4 years. And then in July of 2022, I went all in on the podcast, which was pretty bittersweet, actually, because I loved working with Rebecca at Palmer, and I loved the work there, and it was very, very meaningful. But the podcast had reached a point that I had to make a choice. I'd been staying up for, at that point, 6 years, staying up really late editing and doing all this stuff, and then all this travel opportunities started, and it just didn't work anymore to do both. And thankfully, the podcast was generating enough money that it made sense to make the move. And a lot of that is because of you Patreon supporters who are watching this right now. So thank you. And so that's when I got into conservation. And so that's kind of my career trajectory and what I was doing in conservation. And for those of you not familiar, Palmer and just land trust in general, most of the time they do private land conservation. So they use a tool called a conservation easement, which is a deed restriction that just prevents development. And there are benefits for the landowner for putting one of those on their property. But at the end of the day, most land trusts are basically real estate deals. Doing work at a land trust is real estate deals. So my background carried over well into that. So that's kind of my trajectory, how I ended up doing exactly what I was doing in the conservation world, just to give you some context. Hold on, I got to drink some coffee. All right, so the question is, and the thing that is applicable to anybody listening is, how did I end up getting that job? Because as you can hear from this accent, I'm not from the West. I'm from Tarboro, North Carolina. How in the world did I go? And when I moved to Colorado after being in Costa Rica for a year, I knew one person, and that was Ken Murr, who, again, you can watch that podcast with me and Ken and his daughter, Haley. It's on YouTube and you can listen to it. But so how did I establish myself in the conservation world? Because as I learned pretty quickly, the conservation world in Colorado is very insulated and kind of incestuous. I don't know if that's a politically incorrect word, but a lot of people get established in the Colorado conservation community and they'll work and do great work at a certain organization. They move to a different organization, or they kind of jump between organizations. And so if a job comes up in the Colorado conservation world, it seems like more times than not, I don't know if this is 100% true or not, but it seems to me that a lot of those jobs go to people who are already in the Colorado conservation world because they're well known and people know who they are. And it's a lot less risky than taking a chance on somebody who is not known. And so when I got back from Costa Rica, pretty soon after that, I went and had lunch or coffee with Ken, because he's the only person I knew in the business world in Colorado. And called up with him and said, "Hey, is there anybody else I should be talking to?" And he gave me 2 or 3 different names. And then I went and had coffee or lunch with those 2 or 3 people and asked for 2 or 3 different names. And it kind of spread and spread and spread from there. And I remember pretty early on, I met with these 2, through these initial introductions, there were these 2 conservation lawyers, Bill Silverstein and Larry Keeter, who were both legends in the world of Colorado conservation. And they invited me to their law firm and sat with me for an hour and listened about what I was trying to do, what I wanted to do, and then gave me advice. And at the time, I knew it was very nice of them to do that, but I didn't really realize how influential they were at that moment. And so looking back, I really owe them a lot for taking the time out of their schedule. And I think if they had charged me for that hour, it would have been a lot of money. But they sat with me, and the main thing I remember them saying is like, look, if you want to be in the Colorado conservation community, you just got to keep showing up. People come and go, but it'll take several years for people to really remember who you are and for them to recognize you at these different events. And I remember at the time thinking, man, it won't take that long. It won't take, I can do it faster than that. But it took longer than that actually. But I took that advice, and I give that advice to people all the time. And so I started going to every kind of event I could go to, any kind of networking event there was. Like I remember Trust for Public Land. They've got this really cool office in downtown Denver. They would have some little like happy hour in their courtyard. And somehow I found out about it and I went. And then there was what was called the Colorado Coalition of Land Trusts. Now it's called Keep It Colorado. They had an annual conference. And I think it cost like $200 to go. And I would spend the money and I'd go. And I'm telling you, it was so awkward to me. I've gotten a lot better at that stuff, but the idea of going to one, I'm introverted, even though I'm sitting here talking so much and I have the podcast and all that. I'm definitely introverted. And so the idea of going to these events where I didn't know a single person, or at that point I probably knew like 10 people, and I was not established doing really, really much of anything. Nobody knew who I was. And I'd go and have to strike up conversations with people. But what I realized pretty quickly was that the conservation world, everybody there, I mean, maybe there's one jerk there, but everybody there was as nice as could be, 99.999%. Some people are kind of weird. There's probably maybe 5% that were weird, but the 95% were just as nice as could be, interested in what I was doing, and very open to telling me what they were doing. And when I compared that to some of the different events I would go to when I was in the real estate business, or even going way back, the Merrill Lynch stock brokerage business, it was my kind of people. And those people in the real estate business and the stock brokerage business were not my kind of people. Nothing against those folks, but just given how my brain works and my overall personality, I didn't particularly gel with those kind of folks. Whereas when I showed up at these conservation events, even though I was nervous and didn't know anybody, I felt like I instantly gelled with these people and I enjoyed being with them. And they were just good, smart people who were doing important work. And so even though I didn't know many people, I kind of felt at home, and it gave me the kind of the motivation to continue with this networking. And so, then that kind of led to meeting more people in the conservation world, executive directors, development directors, conservation directors. And whenever I could get coffee with them or get lunch, I would just go and I'd say, look, is there anything I can do to help? What do you need help with? And now that I've been on the side of working for one of these organizations, you understand how tight the finances are and how you do need help. And if somebody offers to help, you should, and they know what they're doing and they're responsible, you should take them up on it. And so a couple of different organizations did take me up on it. And they had me continuing to, helping them with marketing stuff or helping them with fundraising. And I would just help however I could. I mean, I wouldn't do something if I added no value, but overall, my whole posture with them was just like, what do you need help with? How can I help? How can I help? And so, it's worth noting that I was in the real estate business then, so my schedule was relatively flexible. It was up to me as to how I set my schedule. So that gave me a lot of more flexibility around being able to go and have these different coffees and lunches and that kind of thing. And so that's a thing that was unique to me. And then I also found that I was trying my best to focus on the conservation side of real estate. And, you can only do that so much because at the end of the day, some of these ranch deals, I mean, it's not like selling houses where you sell, 20 houses in a year. At some point, you can only sell one ranch a year, or sometimes you sell none and then you sell 3 the next year, whatever. And so focusing on the conservation side of thing, it built these relationships where I would get referrals from different people in the conservation community. So it helped that side of the business as well. And one of the other things I found, so I'd go and I'd say, how can I help? And people seemed to really appreciate that. And it was genuine. But then also I just showed genuine curiosity about the person I was talking to, how they end up doing this work, and then also the work they were doing in the organization. And so I started learning about who was who in the Colorado conservation world, what organizations did what their needs were, what their strong suits were, what their weaknesses were. And I mean, I'm not joking. I don't know how long. I mean, it was 8 years before I got a full-time job in conservation. I started getting more jobs. I started getting some consulting work before that, but I mean, it was probably 4 years before any money was made, as a result of conservation or doing conservation work. So it took me quite a while. So I would imagine somebody who's smarter than me or better at dealing with people than me could speed it up a bit. But I was building this kind of foundation. And one of the things I learned in sales was that if you're a kind of a slickster, fast talker, cold caller type, and you can cold call somebody and get their business, good for you. But you're going to lose that business really quickly when somebody who's a little bit slicker than you cold calls that client. And so what I found was, even though it's a long game, is that building these solid relationships with people, it takes a long time to build them, but then you know them and they know you, and they're not going to leave you or move on to some other relationship because some slickster can talk real quick. I think if you build a solid relationship over many years, that relationship is going to be rock solid, if that makes any sense. So I think being patient and putting in the time to build legitimate relationships over a long period of time, I think it's just a good policy in general. But if you're trying to get into a certain industry, I think it gives you a huge advantage over other people who may just kind of show up and put in a resume, and then when they don't get it, they disappear. And so the way it worked was, some of these different land trusts asked me to be involved. So like, I remember there's a small land trust in Evergreen, Colorado, called Mountain Area Land Trust, and they asked me to be an ambassador because I was very enthusiastic about the work they were doing. And then my friend Eric Glenn at the Colorado Cattlemen's Agricultural Land Trust, that'll be the next podcast after this one. He asked me to be on some committees, not the board, but on some committees. And so I did that. And then Eric also eventually, after several more years, asked me to do some consulting work on behalf of Cattlemen's Land Trust, which was awesome. And it was awesome. I thought I knew a lot about conservation easements and all that kind of thing. And it turns out I hardly knew anything. And so it was a really good way to kind of focus in and learn about conservation easements and that process and the process of putting easement. And then eventually I got asked to be on some boards. I was on the board of the Colorado Youth Corps Association, which is not specifically land conservation. I'd say it's more land stewardship. But and then I got asked to be on the Palmer board, which eventually led to my job. And all those things came because people knew who I was, and it came after years of building these relationships. And so it's this slow thing. And, again, if you're listening to this or watching it, hoping to get some sort of hack that you can do, and then, a month later you got your dream job, there may be one out there, but I don't know how to do it. And so kind of the bottom line with all that stuff, with how I went about doing that, is an idea I got from Seth Godin. And it's an idea I kind of knew, but Seth Godin really lays it out in his book, Lynchpin. But this idea of coming at things with generosity. How can I help? What do you need? I'm here to help. What can I do for you? And with a serious, I'm serious about that when I say it. Obviously good things came to me down the road, but I just went into every interaction in the conservation world with kind of a generous mindset, like I'm here to help and I'm not looking for anything in return. And then eventually, over time, years later, I did get stuff in return. But if I'd been looking for a immediate, like tit for tat kind of relationship, I would have quit after 2 or 3 months. And so I think that was one of the main things in playing the long game and knowing that it's going to take a while if you want to build a real relationship, it's going to take a while. And I found once I was actually in the conservation world, when I was a conservation director, that having that same spirit of generosity when you're dealing with landowners, it was the same thing. And that's what led to success. Not me coming into a farmer saying, let me tell you what you can do to make your thing better, make your farm better, make you operate. Because they would have just laughed. First of all, it's insulting because what do I know about farming? And then second of all, it's just silly. Like I have any idea of what they need. So instead I would go to them. Hey, look, we got resources. We got these tools. How can any of this stuff help? What can I do to help you? This is the menu of stuff I can do. Will any of it help? And that's what I do with the podcast. I mean, I put out stuff that can hopefully add value to people. And when I'm talking to guests, hey, how can I what questions can I ask that will get information out that you want out in the world? It's all about this spirit of generosity. And to like some of my best friends who know me and know that I can sometimes be kind of grumpy and pessimistic, they probably laughing hearing me talk all about generosity. But that has been, if there is a hack, that's the hack, is being generous with your time, with your attention, with whatever you can bring, however you can bring value. So third bullet point, what skills do you need? And one of those emails I read, the guy's asking, do I need GIS skills? The bottom line is, in my opinion, and somebody will probably tell you otherwise, a lot of people probably tell you otherwise, in my opinion, the skills don't matter. When I was at Palmer, I think one of the reasons our team was so effective there is because everybody had a different background. I had the real estate MBA background. There was somebody on staff who was an ecologist. There was somebody on staff who was an actual farmer. There was somebody on staff with like policy background. Before I got there, there was somebody on staff that was an attorney. Everybody had different backgrounds. And, the way I think these skills are important, and you need to be able to bring something, whether it's how to do spreadsheets or how to write a legal document. I mean, I think that stuff matters. But I think you got to have more than that. I think that stuff is necessary, but not the end all be all. So like for the guy asking about GIS, I feel like if you just went and got GIS thinking that that's going to be the secret bullet or the magic bullet that's going to get you a job, I would say you're probably wrong. Or you might be right, but it's probably the kind of job you don't want, where it reminds me when I was in business school and these kind of mid-level corporations like Frito-Lay would show up and be like, we need 4 finance majors. And it's just like, they just need bodies, man. They just need somebody. And I was thinking, man, I don't want to do that. Like they would just get rid of you just as fast as like hiring a robot. And so if you want if you want to work somewhere that wants a GIS robot, then maybe that's the way to go. But I think there's more to it. And so, in my opinion, and I've already talked about this a lot, the most important thing you can do is come to a job like that with the ability to build relationships with people. If you've listened to any of my podcasts, especially in the conservation world, you'll hear that the secret across the board, and there's really no exception to this, is the ability to build relationships with partners, with landowners, being able to, with funders, building legit good relationships. That takes a long time to do this. Build those, and then that's when the work happens. At the end of the day, all these organizations, they're just people. It's just a grouping of people. And we've seen many businesses and many nonprofits that they had a heyday at some point. They were kicking ass. They were doing all this great stuff, and then they kind of disappeared. And you're like, well, what happened there? Why did that happen? Well, it happened because the people changed and the culture changed. And so I think if you can come in as the type of person who knows how to build relationships with people, and that goes back to this generosity piece, being generous and being generous with your time and your effort and your skills, then you layer a skill on top of that, then you got something cool. So in my role, I had built this relationships among the Colorado conservation community. People knew who I was. I knew people at Nature Conservancy. I knew some of the funders. I already had this great network. And then I had real estate experience. So that made me valuable for Palmer. And they saw I had a track record of being able to build relationships with people. And then when I got in Palmer, I built even more and was able to go out and raise a lot of money. And I think the podcast had helped a lot with that, because I'd been doing the podcast for like 3.5 years, I think, at that point when I joined Palmer. So I had that network as well. But having this really solid foundation of relationships and a track record of being able to build relationships was, I think, what was valuable. And so I think that's the most important thing. And then you layer your skill on top of that. And I don't care what's like, when I was looking to hire, I'm going to talk about this later. I looked at people with all different skill sets. Some were salespeople, some were scientists, some were nonprofit, like HR type people, some were project management people. But and I think that stuff's important. But the real deal with conservation, at least working land trusts and doing conservation work, like conservation easements, there's nowhere really to learn how to do it other than doing it. So you need that base level. So if I had to offer some advice on how to build a network, first of all, I want to say when I'm talking about networking, I'm not talking about this scumbag kind of trying to get stuff out of people or trying to build relationships, shallow relationships that so you can extract some sort of value from the person. I'm talking about building relationships with people that you like. And I'm not saying they're going to be your best friend, but that's somebody you have a shared interest with. And so, as I mentioned earlier, when I was trying to build these relationships, both in the stock brokerage world or in the real estate world, I couldn't do it. I wasn't good at it. I mean, I could grit my teeth. I think that's where my ultra running comes in. Like, if I have to do something, I can grind it out, but it doesn't mean it's fun and it doesn't mean it's effective. And it was a real hard deal trying to network and build real relationships for me with a lot of the real estate people. I mean, for the group that I worked with, Ken Murr and Murr Ranch Group, those guys are awesome. And they're really, and I loved every single one of them. They bring real value to the real estate experience. But when you get outside of that circle and have to deal with some of the other people, I didn't like them. And I had a hard time building a relationship with them. And that's probably a weakness of mine, that I can't just like grind it out and make myself do a good job, but it was not good. And I didn't realize how bad I was at that until I joined the Colorado conservation community, and it was so effortless to be able to do it. And it's because I respected the people. And so, as I've already mentioned, you build these relationships with people, you can learn what they do, how they got to what they're doing, and then you can learn about the organizations. You can learn about what they need. And so when a job opportunity comes up and you want to apply for it, they know who you are when you put in your resume and you put in your cover letter, and you can send them an email. Hey, I'm applying for this. Keep an eye out for it. And then, like, are you going to be a good fit with what they're doing? Because you kind of have an idea of what's going on. And again, you got to remember, I'm introverted. I'm not like some guy who's out glad handing, just loves talking to people. I love being by myself, and I need to be by myself, but I was able to kind of systematically meet all the people I needed to meet, and really learn about the Colorado conservation community, because one, I enjoyed it, and two, they were also nice and welcoming to me, and three, it's important work that I felt drawn to do. And so another thing about that, the idea of understanding the organization, being able to send your resume in so that it's a warm lead. At least you know somebody in there. Somebody is going to be waiting for your information to come in, or for your resume and your cover letter. I heard a podcast one time, and I can't remember what it was, but it was with a venture capitalist, and he was saying they take absolutely no funding proposals from people. Cold leads. Like, you can't just email the VC firm and say, hey, I've got this business idea. He said they only do warm leads. And then when he expanded on it, he said the reason we do that is because, starting businesses in the technology space is extremely hard. And if you cannot figure out a way to kind of network your way into my firm and at least get to know somebody, so you can say, hey, I know Joe Smith. Joe Smith told me to send you this. He said, if you can't figure out how to do that, there's no point in even trying to start a business, because at the end of the day, it's all about networking and building these relationships. And if you can't figure out a way to get to know at least one person in my firm, there's no point in us even having this conversation. And I agree with that. And I think it's the same once you get into conservation, once you get into the conservation world and you're having to deal with funders and foundations. I was at some conference and somebody raised their hand and was like, I don't know how to, they say they don't take unsolicited proposals. And I don't know, how do I submit a proposal? And I remember looking, and this was like probably a 60-year-old person that appeared to have been in the conservation world for a long time. And I was just like, man, if that person understood about the need to build these relationships, I mean, the answer to that is you find somebody inside the organization that you can know, and you get to know them. And then all of a sudden you got a warm lead. So I think that's really important to think about. And, one of the things, this is kind of Tim Ferriss type tactics type stuff, but I hope it doesn't sound disingenuous, because I think it's, I want to, make very clear, I enjoyed more than I could have ever imagined getting to know all these conservation people. So while it did take effort, it was not at all, I wouldn't consider it like work or unpleasant work, building this network. I really loved it. But one of the things I always have done, kind of a specific tactic, is I meet all these great people and I have these wonderful conversations with them over lunch or coffee. And I remember those conversations, and we talk about books, we talk about, different conservation stuff. And so if I'm, some article comes across my desk or through my computer 3 months later, and it reminds me of that conversation with the person, I send it to them. Hey, I just read this thing. It made me think about our cool conversation. Hope you're doing well. Link. And then send it. Nothing fancy, but just kind of, and I've read where people keep some sort of spreadsheet or some kind of project, contact management software, so they can do that more systematically. I never did that. I did, if I hit it off with somebody, it would stick in my brain, and I would send them different stuff, and then that keeps that relationship going. And no expectation they write back. Hey, I thought of you. I'm sending you this. Hope you enjoy. Hope you're doing great. Email drives me crazy, so I assume it drives everybody else crazy. And so that's kind of one of the little tactics I would do. And then kind of last thing about the network that I think is very much worth mentioning is network is everything. And again, this is for me, but network is everything. It's the most important asset, if you call it that I have. And I'm not, again, when I start talking like that, it makes it think that it's kind of disingenuous, all these different people that I've established relationships with. And it's not, because as I mentioned, I have a hard time being around people that I don't like. And it's very obvious when I'm around somebody I don't like, and my wife has to deal with the side effects of that problem with my personality. So I really, really, really enjoy all the people that I've built this network with. That being said, I would never trade my network for anything. I can't imagine an amount of money within reason that I would ever give up my network or get rid of my network. And I remember when I started with a real estate company, not Ken, a different one, they kind of started demanding that I give all my contacts to them and as if they owned my contacts. And, at that point, it's not like I had a huge network, but I did have my different educational networks and people that were valuable to me, and that I valued their time and their opinion. And I didn't want them to be spammed, or I didn't want to sell out their information to somebody. And I refused to do that. I'm not giving up my network. And right now I'm very careful with when somebody asks for an introduction or anything like that, because I've spent a lot of time now going on in Colorado, going on 13 years building my network. And I feel like that is the most important thing, and the thing I value the most, and the thing that has brought me, any sort of thing that could be considered success that I've had is because of my network. And so my advice to people would be, if somebody's asking you for introductions or asking you to, for lack of a better term, sell out your network, give your network up, do not do it. I would quit any job I had before I gave up my network, or abused my network, or used it in a way that was disrespectful to the people in my network. So I remember that thing with that real estate company, and it drove me crazy. It made me really mad at the time. And so I always tell people, and now that I'm, years out from that, it's very clear that I made the right choice on that. So I always like to hit that home. All right, let me drink some more coffee. Fifth thing, holy shit, we're at 45 minutes. If anybody's still listening, I hope you're getting some out of this. Fifth bullet point, what did I look for when I was hiring people? So I look for things that cannot be taught. Real estate, conservation easements, spreadsheets, cash flow statements, whatever. All that stuff can be taught. You could teach somebody brain surgery, I couldn't learn it because I'm not smart enough, but there are all these skills, these things that you can learn through books or through mentorship. I wasn't looking for any of that. What I was looking for are the kind of the intangibles, things that are cooked into a person's personality. So when I think about what I was looking for a base level of intelligence. You got to be smart. The ability, a demonstrated track record, and the ability to work really hard. And I'm not talking about grinding and, working 100 hours a week, but I'm talking about working when it's time to work, to focus in and get your stuff done. A base level of curiosity. I think that's very important, because if you're curious, you're humble. And if you're curious, I can count on that person going out and learning all the stuff they need to learn to make this conservation stuff happen. Honesty obviously goes without saying, and that's something that is pretty universal across the board in conservation. That's not an issue that comes up a lot. But after being in the real estate business for as long as I was and having to fight and sue so many scumbags over the years, honesty was something that really stuck out, that I was aware of, but probably I didn't need to be, because everybody, the vast majority of people in the conservation world, that's baked in. And then what do you know? The ability to form relationships with people. The project, when I hired my guy down in Pueblo, the project we were working on was that Bessemer farmland project. And we were dealing with a lot of farmers. And we had a guy who had been there years before I was, who had been building these relationships with farmers. So as I was hiring Dylan, who has been down there for going on 2 years now, that I kept telling him, I'm like, look, man, these relationships have been built very, very carefully over many, many years, and they could be screwed up in a heartbeat. And so we got to be able to follow up. We got to do what we say we're going to do. We got to just, above all else, the thing is to maintain these relationships, because without the buy-in of the local community, any work that we were doing down in that area would not happen. And, as I said earlier, you go in with the spirit of generosity. What do you need? Everything is driven by what the community needs. And if the community doesn't trust you, or you are unable to build a relationship with that community, you're not going to get anything good done. So that was my number one thing. Does this person know how to build relationships? Have they done it in the past? Would I bet a lot of money that they can do it into the future? And as I mentioned, I can teach the real estate skills. That's not hard. I mean, you look at the average real estate agent. We're not dealing with Stephen Hawking. It's not difficult. And so I was also looking. One thing that I made very clear during that hiring process is I want somebody who's ambitious and has a desire to grow and learn and evolve and do more stuff. And I told Dylan, and this may not be what you're supposed to do when you're hiring somebody, but I was like, look, man, if you retire here, I made a serious mistake hiring you, because he was like in his mid-20s. I wanted somebody who was going to come in, be excited about the work, go as hard as he could, learn a lot, do a great job, and then evolve. And if that meant not evolving inside Palmer, like there was an opportunity, then he'd go somewhere else. Go to the Nature Conservancy, go to Cattlemen's, go to Trust for Public Land, go to Conservation Fund. And then from there, do that for a while, and then find a new job, and keep evolving and keep using all the experiences that he had, amassed throughout his career to keep building and building and building. And so the idea that I would expect somebody to stay, like if I was still at Palmer and then Dylan came to me and was like, hey man, I got a new job at Cattlemen's, I'd say, well, what can I do to keep you? Because he's awesome and he's a great guy and he works very hard and he's better at building relationships than I am actually. And if I couldn't do it, I'd be like, man, well, good luck. I'm so happy for you. And I think if you're ever at an organization where somebody gets like real pissed off or mad when it comes time for you to evolve and move on, it's probably a good sign you need to get the hell out of there, because that strikes me as a cult. When somebody is just, they can't think about you as a person and like think about you as the type of person that needs to evolve and grow and continue to be ambitious and make your career yours, but they just want to control you at this organization. If you ever get any crap from anybody about that kind of stuff, I'd just be like, well, I made the right decision. I got to get out of here. And again, that's just my thought, but I've seen it happen time and time and time again. And, at the end of the day, you got to do what's right for you and your family and your career. And so I think being ambitious and being focused on kind of growing and evolving in your career is very important. And it's what I was looking for. All right. So that is that. And then number 6, what should you look for in an organization? So as I mentioned, I've had the great pleasure of getting to know tons of conservation organizations. It started out just in Colorado, but now because of the podcast, all over the West. I mean, it's wild how many of these different organizations I know and understand what they're trying to do and really appreciate the work they're doing. And so if say you had 2 different job offers between 2 different organizations, both awesome, say they're paying the exact same amount of money, you're equally excited. This would never happen, but just say everything's equal. How do you weigh the pros and cons of these organizations and pick which one to go to? And at the end of the day, and I don't know if other people agree with this, but I stand behind it 100%. It's about the people. No question. It is 100% about the people. I've found that the people that I work with are far more important than the actual work that I'm doing. One of the best jobs I ever had was my summer internship during business school when I had my health scare, actually, in Washington, D.C. at a publicly traded REIT, doing real estate development, building Class A office buildings. I could not be farther than what I do now. But it was the best group of people. They were, for a big time, very, extremely highly capitalized company building some of the biggest skyscrapers you'll see on a skyline in New York, Boston, San Francisco, Washington, D.C. They were the most professional, honest, hardworking, focused people that I've ever been around. And I was there for 3 months. And that's often a reminder of I couldn't be doing work that's further from that now. But those people, it was one of the best professional experiences I've ever had because of the people. And so I would never go to a place because it's a brand. Like say you got the person, the man or woman who's going to hire you seems kind of weird or sketchy, but it's a really great brand, a well-known brand in conservation. I would not do that. I would rather go to an off-brand that has a really, really good high-performing team that you enjoy spending time with any day of the week. I've seen that happen. I've been involved in those kind of situations, and then I've seen it happen time and time and time and time again. And now that I'm 45 and I got white hair, I really am seeing these patterns. So I would say you want to deal with people. And then along the lines of something I said earlier, I was listening to, I think it was the same podcast with that venture capital guy. And he was an older guy who had retired. And he said he went back and did kind of a postmortem of every single investment he ever made in his entire career, billions and billions and billions of dollars of investment. And he went back and said, which ones did he miss? Which ones was he right on? And tried to figure out what's the magic formula. And he realized that there were a lot of deals he passed on because he was focused on the business. And he thought the business seemed kind of sexy and exciting. And what he should have done is focused on the people. Because he said if he had only exclusively focused on the people and their drive as a person, their ethics, how hard they want to work, and not even really paid attention to the business, only focused on the people, he would have exponentially increased his returns. So I thought that was really interesting. I think about that all the time because the idea, whether it's the strategy of the organization or the brand or whatever, that can all be very shiny. But at the end of the day, all organization is people. So I would say you 100% focus on the people. Do you get along with those people? Do you feel like they would push you to be will you be a good member of the team? And, along those lines, I'd look real hard at employee retention. If you got an organization where people are leaving, every month somebody's leaving and they're hiring somebody new and this and that and going in and out, that's something's going on there. And it might be nothing, but it also might be a big warning sign that there's something going on with the culture within the organization. So I think that's a pretty easy thing you can pay attention to, and goes back to building the relationship and being involved. If you're involved in the conservation world and you're kind of keeping your finger on the pulse, which organizations have big turnover, which ones retain their talent. And the podcast is coming out after this one with Eric Glenn. He's a master of retaining talent. And that's one thing he has done. We talk a lot about that, about the culture. Another thing I think is very important is you need to look at the people and you need to say, are these people committed to this cause? I think sometimes there are organizations in the conservation world where there are people that work there that they just want a job. It's not like they do a lot of stuff outdoors, or it's not like they feel called to do conservation. It's not, they just want a job, like a development director. Maybe they were raising money for a college or something, and then they get hired they want a new job, so they get hired at a conservation thing. In my mind, if you're working in conservation, you need to have a real desire to do conservation, and you need to feel drawn to do it. And I can tell you, if you end up in a place where there are people who don't share that, it can be extremely frustrating. Kind of a sidebar there. I understand everybody needs to make a living. I need to make a living, but I have no clue why somebody would get a job at a nonprofit unless they felt drawn to the cause, and felt like they needed to contribute. Because there are a lot of better ways to make money, and you can make a lot more money doing other stuff. So the fact that somebody would work at a nonprofit and not care about the cause, to me, that's a red flag. So I think you should figure out who the other people there are and why they're there. Let me see. I think you need to pay attention to the board. A lot of times the board is not involved in day-to-day. The board should not be involved in day-to-day, but you need to get an idea who's on the board, who they are. They're the kind of people you'd want to associate with. Are they, slickster business type people, or are they people who are very successful and have a track record and a real deep connection to conservation? You want to pay attention to that. And, every board has kind of some trophy members on there that may or may not really care about what's going on. But overall, I think the board can and should set the trajectory of an organization. And so I'd pay really close attention to who's on the board, because that can change over time. And so every now and then there could be some the opportunity or for some type of person that you probably wouldn't want to be associated with joining a board just because they're rich. If that's the kind of thing, in my advice, you want to avoid that kind of organization. And if you're in an organization like that and it starts changing, I'd start looking for a new job, because again, it goes back to relationships. And then, one thing you want to ask is, during your job, during the interview part of it, is you want to ask, how do they measure success, both as an organization and then you individually? Are they doing it by acres conserved? Like the Cattlemen's Land Trust, one of the things that they are very focused on is the number of acres conserved. And they've increased their acres conserved by over 50% in the last 7 years. And they're a almost 30-year-old organization. So that, you want to understand, and it sounds very basic, but I think a lot of people don't ask this question: what is going to make this successful? And then you want to ask that for your own job. What do I need to do to be successful? I need to know quantitatively what needs to happen for me to be successful in this role. And then, last thing, which may sound crazy talking about, but I think it's important, is you want to know how they communicate within the organization. You want to know, do they have 15 different electronic platforms going back and forth, like a project management software, Slack, email, some crazy voicemail thing? Like, how do they communicate? Because, I'm a disciple of Cal Newport, who wrote Deep Work and Digital Minimalism in a World Without Email. And, you need to have time to actually do the work, and you need to have quiet time to be able to focus and get stuff done and not get in what Cal Newport calls the hyperactive hive mind. And so I think a lot of organizations now, they use these tools. They call them tools. I call them distraction machines to do work. But I think you want to understand, how does that work, and what tools are used, what are the systems for communicating among the team, and does that work for you? And I think it's very important to ask these questions. And when I was hiring people, I appreciated that they would ask these questions. I think it's weird if people don't ask questions, and if it's a two-way street. And I mean, if you just need a job and you got to, there's some financial stress and you just got to get a job and get in, that's one thing. But if you're looking to evolve your career and you're being focused on this kind of thing, these are the kind of questions you need to ask. And if anybody bristles when you ask these questions, then something's off, because they should appreciate the questions, and you're bringing value to this organization, and you're going to be devoting 40, 50 hours a week to this organization, you deserve to have your questions answered. And so don't hesitate to drill them in the most respectful way with these questions. All right, more coffee. That's all my coffee. So that means we got to be winding this thing down. Over the years, a lot of people have asked me, how, do you have any career advice? And the best advice I get, I've never had an original idea in my life. Everything I've thought is because of other smart people that I've either met or read their books. And so one of the best things, as you probably can guess, that I recommend people do is read books. And I cannot tell you how many times, I guess I could look on Amazon or whatever and see, but the two books that I give out when I hired Dylan, and then I've given these books out over and over and over. The two books that I give out that I recommend, the first one I've been giving out for probably 13 years now is called Linchpin by Seth Godin. If you're watching, there it is. Linchpin, Are You Indispensable? And I read this right when I moved to Colorado, and it really changed my perspective on things. And the whole idea is that you don't want to be a cog in the machine. You don't want to be a robot. You don't want to be that guy that gets hired by Frito-Lay to just crank spreadsheets all day. Because if you are that guy, you are easily replaced. You want to be a linchpin. You want to figure out how to bring the thing, combine all the skills you have and your personality into a person who can bring value and cannot be replaced. They might be if you leave, they can hire somebody else, but they will never be able to replace you because of the specific skills that you bring to the job. And so that includes the ability to build relationships. That in my case, I'm not saying I'm indispensable, but I bring a very unique skill set and a unique presence to whatever I'm doing. I've got this bizarre background that combines finance with real estate, with conservation, with podcast, with ultra running, with all this crazy reading, and with the ability to build relationships and the ability to raise money. So that's a very odd combination, but it works in certain circumstances. And so that's what you want to be. You don't want to just be a one-trick pony. I'm a finance person. I'm an expert on conservation easements. That's great, but you need to have some certain combination that allows you to a very special combination that only you can have, and you need to embrace it, and you need to be super excited to tell people about it. Because I feel like that's the kind of thing I was looking for when I was hiring people. And I feel like that all the people I've seen that are successful, like for example, Carlos at Nature Conservancy, he was a lawyer before and now he's running the Colorado chapter of the Nature Conservancy, and he's from Argentina, and he's got this amazingly unique background that makes him and makes him uniquely qualified to do the work he does. So I would highly recommend Linchpin. The other that's come out more recently is Extreme Ownership, How Navy SEALs Lead and Win. If you're watching, you can see it. Basically, this book, I'm obsessed with Jocko for a lot of reasons. It's by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, two former Navy SEALs who have a leadership consulting company. And at the end of the day, the idea is you are responsible for everything. Everything is your fault. If something goes wrong, it's your fault. And I think and it sounds aggressive, but it's not aggressive at all. And I really, in some ways, I think it's the secret to life. If you can take ownership over all aspects of your life and all aspects of your work, I've found it to be a very empowering way to live. And it's just a very powerful concept that I'm a butcher if I try to give you all the reasons why I think it's so great. But I would highly recommend those books. I seriously, I give them out to everybody. Tim Ferriss always asks that question, what's a book that you've gifted? Which I think that's a funny use of the word gift, but what are books you've gifted? And I would say I've gifted Seth Godin's Linchpin, Extreme Ownership, and then The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt, which isn't really related, although it's related to everything. It's very good stuff comes from reading that book. So those are the two that I'd say are mandatory reading, and there are links in the episode notes if you want to click through and get them. Some others that have been very important to me when I think about career stuff. One is called Boyd, the Fighter Pilot Who Changed the Art of War by Robert Coram. It's about this guy who basically invented he played a big role in inventing the F-14, F-15, F-16, and he kind of as they said, he reinvented the art of war, and he was a real maverick, and he did things his own way, even though he was in the military, which I think is pretty cool to see that there's always room for people to do things differently, even in a place like the military that has their way of doing things. Let My People Go Surfing by Yvon Chouinard. My main takeaway from that one is he would just say, if people came to work there, just get your work done. I don't care when you do it. Just get your work done. And he hired people that were passionate about the cause. That's a good one. How to Win Friends and Influence People. That's an old school classic one, but it's very, 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 very applicable. And I printed off like a summary of one part of it. And part of it says 6 ways to make people like you. Become genuinely interested in other people. Number 2, smile. Number 3, remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language. Number 4, be a good listener. Encourage others to talk about themselves. Number 5, talk in terms of the other people's interests. And number 6, make the other person feel important and do it sincerely. And I mean, I can't think of a better summary of really how I go about building relationships. And if you on the podcast, I follow this. I didn't fully remember this exactly, these 6 points, but it's amazing. Other than the thing about remembering people's names, I'm awful at that. I remember people's faces. I'm not good at remembering names, but that is the exact formula that I've used all the way, asking about, talk in terms of the people's interest, be a good listener. I mean, I'm always asking people, what books have you read? And I'm serious. I'm interested. I wouldn't be asking if I wasn't interested. And so I think How to Win Friends and Influence People is very important. Warren Buffett credits that book with all of his success. I already mentioned Deep Work, Digital Minimalism, and A World Without Email by Cal Newport. Basically just the need, you got to focus, and you got to turn off all this electronic stuff to actually get real work done. Atomic Habits by James Clear. I put off reading that book for many, many, many years because I thought the title seemed kind of cheesy, but it's one of the best, I guess you'd call it a self-help book. It's really, really good about establishing good habits. Think Again, and a book called Originals by Adam Grant. Both of those are just really about keeping an open mind and how do you do work that's original. I enjoyed both of those. I think Endurance, Shackleton's Incredible Voyage by Alfred Lansing is a great one, mainly for the bad side of work. And it's the main thing I remember from that book is there was one guy on that whole expedition that had a bad attitude. And was a bad egg. And Shackleton would not let that guy leave his side because he said, if I let this guy out, he will infect, that negative attitude will infect this whole crew and everything is going to go south. And as you remember, Shackleton got everybody out of there alive after several years floating on an ice cap. And I've seen that happen time and again, both personally and then watching in other organizations. If there's one bad attitude in there, one bad attitude spreads a lot more aggressively than a good attitude. So you could have 20 people that are awesome and gung-ho and then one sourpuss with a bad attitude that's going to ruin everything. So I often think about that as a great leadership book, the Endurance. For the Love of Land, Global Case Studies in Grazing in Nature's Image by Jim Howell, who's been on the podcast twice. That book has given me untold amounts of information that allows me to talk with ranchers. I'm from North Carolina. I don't know anything about ranching, but by reading these books, I'm able to get enough information in my head to where I can have a intelligent conversation with somebody that does know about it. And that book has been vital for that. Another one just about conservation in the West, if you're thinking about getting into conservation in the West, is Losing Eden, An Environmental History of the American West by Sarah Dant. Just a great overview. She's been on the podcast. She's probably going to come back on actually too. And then Blood and Thunder by Hampton Sides. Again, just a good overview of the history of the West that gives you some information and some ability to talk with really anybody about things that are of interest in the West. And then I just say, what I've done is I just read widely. And the more, as I said, I'm introverted. For most of my life, I've thought of myself as being very shy. And books provide a long, almost infinite list of topics that you can bring up with somebody to start a conversation. So like somebody likes college football. I don't care about college football, but I read Nick Saban's biography and I'm fascinated by Nick Saban. I can talk about that. I'm not, I like music, but I'm not like a music guru, but I've read Flea's memoir and Dave Grohl's memoir, and I can talk about that. And it's very, it's very, very interesting stuff. So that gives me, and I do that across the board. I read all this stuff about consciousness. I mean, I'm looking at my bookshelf in front of me right now. I got mountaineering books. I got history books. I got Fight Club. I got War by Sebastian Junger, Marcus Aurelius, Peter Heller, a book called An Arbitrary Stupid Goal, a book about fishing. Read widely. Read stuff that's interesting to you, and then it'll give you stuff to talk to other people about. I think that's one of the many benefits of reading a lot. And final point, pros and cons. The pros and cons of working in conservation. The pros far outweigh the cons. It's, at the end of the day, you're working with really, really smart, really, really nice, really purpose-driven people that are intent on using their careers and their skills and their brain power to making the world a better place. And I think you find that across the board at all nonprofit organizations, or at most nonprofit organizations. There are a lot of ways to make a lot more money than working at a nonprofit. And so the people that are doing it are committed. And, after spending the vast majority of my career in the business world, it's very, very, very clear how awesome the people are in the conservation world. And my life has just been enriched beyond anything I could have ever imagined because of being able to get to be friends with and work with all these amazing people in the conservation world. So I think that is the number one pro, the people. It comes back to the people, it comes back to the relationships. I think a pro for if you've got kind of a background that may not be, you're not a natural resources major in college or whatever. I think if you can come in with a different background, as I did, I came with a business background, it allows you to innovate in ways that maybe are not being done. If you can come in with a new approach, a new way of thinking about things, you can maybe approach some of these problems with a new way and really make some great headway. And so I would, I think, the more varied the backgrounds, the better. You don't have to be a GIS expert. Doesn't hurt. I wish I was a GIS expert, but I'm not. But if you can bring in kind of a different perspective that gets conservation done, man, what's better than that? And then the other pro, and it could be a con too, but once you do at least in my experience, once you do purpose-driven work, you never go back. I could not imagine ever going back to a job where I'm only just chasing money. Like the only point of it is to make money, make as much money as possible. I need to make money. My family needs money. I'm probably not making enough of it right now, but money is very, very, very important, obviously. But, once when you can combine the ability to get a paycheck with the ability to do work that matters and that makes the world better, that's for people that are wired like me and probably like you, if you're still listening, there's nothing better. And it would be very, very tough to go back. I mean, obviously I would if I had, if there was some emergency or some crazy thing happen and I had to, go and be a garbage man, I'd do that without blinking for my family. But assuming things are steady as they are, I couldn't imagine doing non-purpose driven work. So cons, the main con is the amount of money that these nonprofits pay. It's, I think it's across the board. It's not a thing that's specific to conservation. And I think some of the larger conservation organizations here in Colorado and a lot of the foundations, they pay very well. But I think for the vast majority of nonprofits and conservation nonprofits, the pay is, it's unacceptable. And it's a systematic thing. It's nothing about, the individual people that work there or the hiring people. I remember when I got hired at Palmer and there are all these stats of what a director level person makes. And I was, making at the high end of that. And in my opinion, it's still kind of unacceptable. It's not enough. And that's nothing about Palmer. They were being very, very, very fair and generous for the status quo of what happens. Of what is expected in the nonprofit world. But to be honest, I don't know how that works financially. If you're married and you have kids and you're thinking about sending kids to college and all this kind of stuff, it truly, just in basic math, it doesn't work, which is too bad. I think over time, maybe you can build it up but the type of lifestyle which is a very simple lifestyle, but the type of lifestyle that my family wants, I just couldn't imagine spending my entire career in the nonprofit space. And it's too bad because there needs to be a change in that, and hopefully there will be. There's a really good YouTube video that I'll link to by this guy named Dan Pallotta, and it says the way we think about charity is dead wrong. And he talks a lot about the unacceptable pay that that nonprofits are kind of forced to pay their employees. So that's a topic. You can watch that. He's a lot smarter than me, but I would say, you're not going to be killing it. I mean, it's going to be tough if you're trying to raise a family on the money that you're going to make at a nonprofit. So that's just a reality, and that's not a knock against anybody, but that's what I think. And speaking of pay, assuming you get a job offer at one of these nonprofits, negotiate the pay and push hard on that. When I was in the hiring role, I expect people to push back on the money. And my time in real estate let me know that everything is negotiable. Everything. And so even if you're not the type that likes pushing back or negotiating, if somebody offers you 70 grand, you say, well, I need 85, and say it confidently, because there is room. There is always room to negotiate, and you are very valuable, and you're bringing a lot of value to the organization. You need to push them on that, because there is money to be paid more, and you're already getting paid not enough. And so, pushing it up as high as possible. It's not aggressive. It's not some slimy business tactic. It's looking out for you and your family. And so push on that. And then, so not pros or cons, but just kind of the reality of it is I love conservation, and I love my time fully devoted to conservation, but it's still work. The work I was doing is basically real estate work, and it's not like you're out frolicking in the wildflower fields and it's just this amazing, you're just happy as can be all day long. It can be a grind, and there's full of frustrations, as any job is, but knowing that you're doing this work that matters, it makes it all worthwhile. I think of it a lot like running an ultra marathon, like it's hard and it's tough. And mile 75, I'm over in the bushes throwing up, and I'm like, man, this is tough. And I'm not really having fun right now. But if somebody showed up and they're like, hey, I can have you out here sitting on a beach right now, I'd say, nah, this is awesome. This is what I'm here to do. I'm here to work hard. And so I think that's how the conservation world is. It's hard work, but it's important work, and it's work that needs to be done. And then another just reality is, all the kind of bullshit stuff that comes with any kind of job. Like I talked about the Slack, the project management software, email, all that kind of stuff. But that's just a reality of work these days. All right. I'm at 80 minutes. I'm going to wrap it up. Bottom line, if I had to summarize this thing and you're still listening, network and relationships are everything. That is everything. You can learn everything else fairly quickly, but building long-term solid relationships is the most important. Number 2, figure out a way to have a narrative for your personal story. When you're going and talking to these organizations and trying to build a relationship and hopefully get a job one day, be able to tell a story about your career that is compelling and exciting. My career is so out from left field in so many ways, but I'm able to, in a very genuine way, kind of tell people how it all links together, and how my crazy career and all these crazy experiences and health scares and living in Costa Rica and blah, 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 how all that stuff will benefit them. So I think benefit the organization and allow more conservation to happen. So figure out a way to tell your story in a way that's compelling and fun and humble yet confident. Understand all the organizations in your space, understand what they need, understand what they do, and figure out how you can plug yourself in there. Go into everything with a spirit of generosity. Play the long game. These relationships are not going to be built quickly. You don't want quick relationships. You want them to go, you want to build them solid over many, many years. Follow up with people. I used not to understand this because I had more time, but now I don't have a lot of time, and I'm fairly disorganized when it comes to email. And so I always appreciate it when somebody emails me and I don't write back, and then 2 weeks later they follow up and they say, hey, just want to make sure you didn't miss this. don't hesitate to follow up. Just do it, obviously do it respectfully. And there's a quote that I saw, that guy Mark Manson, who wrote some book I have over here, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F. I saw a thing and he said, why is it so hard to make friends as an adult? And then the answer is, because everyone worth knowing has something better to do. And I think that's the case. The kind of people that you'd want to work for in the conservation world are very busy, and they're doing a lot of important stuff. And email, hopefully, is at the bottom of their list of priorities. So if you have to follow up a few times, do it. Get their attention and follow up. And you can do it a lot, the way I mentioned earlier. Hey, I saw this article. I thought you might like it. Generous. And then the final thing is, don't be afraid to embrace side projects. You got your full-time job. See if you can do some consulting work for a conservation organization, or like I did, start a podcast or start a blog or do some sort of side project, whether it's money-making or not, that puts you out in the world and expands your network a little bit. I think, when you, as everybody does to everybody now, you Google people, it's good when you Google somebody to see cool stuff pop up on the internet that they've done. And so I would really advise people to have side projects and then make them visible for the world to see, because I think that only, it helps with the relationship building. It helps establishing so people know who you are. It shows a pattern of adding value. It shows a pattern of hard work. So I feel like that is a kind of a surefire way to kind of allow yourself to build relationships and establish a reputation, even while you're asleep. If it's on the internet, it's working while you're asleep. So I think that's very, very important. All right. So that's my 8 pages of notes, 84 minutes. I greatly apologize if anybody's still listening, but I've been meaning to do this for probably 3 years now, and I've been too nervous to do it. So I came out here early on a Saturday morning and plugged in the video camera, plugged in my microphone, and this is everything you need to know about everything that you could probably learn a lot more. This is everything I have to offer about how to get a job. So in conservation and how to establish itself in conservation. So I got to, before I wrap this thing up, just once again say thank you for listening, and thank you to everybody in the conservation world who's been so kind to me. Like I said, when I rolled into Colorado from Costa Rica, I didn't know anybody. And it's just because of the generosity and the kindness of people in the conservation world that I've been able to have this really fun career that's led in ways that I would have never expected. And it's what's allowing me to sit here and now, have something to offer and something to hopefully kind of pay back what has been paid to me. And so I just really appreciate y'all listening. If you have any other questions that I could answer, this may be the last time you ever want to hear this, but if there are other questions, send them through the little form on my website. I'd love to compile some and do more of these if it adds value. But thank you so much. Talk to you soon. Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number 1, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number 2, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number 3, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number 4, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. 1 email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way. So head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.